So hi, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Natalie Irwin, Director of Stakeholder Engagement here at Efficiency Canada. I'm located in Ottawa, Ontario, which is the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. So welcome back to the first discovery session since our summer hiatus. It feels like we took the whole summer off, but it was actually just August and then a little bit in September for Labor Day weekend. So I hope you enjoyed some time with family, some friend time, or maybe even some solo time just to relax and regroup before the bustle of the fall starts. So before we get started today, just a reminder to everyone that our guest speakers will present for approximately 20 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions. There are two ways to ask questions. One, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. You can ask the question yourself. The second way is you can type your question in the Q&A box and we'll get to it at the end of the presentations and I will essentially narrate your question on your behalf. We do have a hard stop at 12:45 p.m. Eastern time so that everyone can finish their lunch or breakfast or afternoon snack, depending where you are in the country. And I'm pleased to welcome two speakers today from Emissions Reductions Alberta, who will be speaking to pivoting their work during the pandemic and how they've managed to stay successful. So please join me in welcoming Marc, the Program Director, and Allison Mostowich. I should ask you how to say your last name, sorry. Outreach and Engagement Manager. Thanks for joining us, Marc and Allison. Oh, perfect.
Thanks, Natalie.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks for having us. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. I think introduction's already done, so we were going to say that, but we'll just skip it. But maybe as some context, both Allison and I previously worked at Energy Efficiency Alberta, supporting energy efficiency program design, outreach. And at least for myself personally, I've been in this industry for getting on 15 years now, a little bit long. But to be honest, what's interesting is that launching a program during and right after a pandemic and some pretty difficult economic times here in Alberta was something that I definitely thought we would never be doing. So I think during the next 20 minutes, although I'll probably talk longer than that, we're going to share really how this program was designed to support businesses and contractors during a pandemic. And at the end of the discussion, we know there's a bunch of folks on this call probably who are delivering programs or other initiatives across Canada. We really encourage you to share anything that you've tried during this time as well that's been successful. So before I dive into the details, I did want to share a little bit about who we are and who Emissions Reductions Alberta is. So ERA is a nonprofit-based corporation with the mandate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and grow Alberta's economy by accelerating the development of and adoption of innovative solutions and technologies. So since 2009, ERA has been around investing the proceeds from the carbon price paid by large final emitters in our province. These investments are really geared towards helping innovators and developers demonstrate GHG reducing technologies that we hope will come into the economy and lower the costs, improve competitiveness, and really accelerate Alberta's transformation towards decarbonization. It's a small organization, but likely many of you are probably familiar with it, particularly the mainstream types of programs, which are funding competitions really geared towards piloting or demonstrating or even field testing early product development. And we've supported a whole wide range of projects over the years. Now, when designing energy savings for business, though, we're really happy to bring a new format of programming into ERA's portfolio. So instead of just large calls for innovative projects, the ESB is now bringing a component where we're offering a mass market program that helps accelerate the uptake of proven technologies, commercially available technologies. And it's really opening the door to smaller project sizes and smaller businesses. So we launched it in February of this year. And for those from outside the province, the ESB program is a prescriptive program targeted at small and medium scale commercial and industrial facilities just within the province, with up to $55 million in funding available, which was actually joint from the province and the federal governments. ESB was funded as an energy efficiency program, and more importantly, though, as part of an economic stimulus recovery plan. So it's a one-time short-term stimulus program, which was a relatively new concept for us at the time when we were designing it. So we really built it with 4 core purposes in mind. So first was obviously to boost the economy by getting projects out there and started today as fast as possible. Supporting job creation and job preservation, particularly across our contractor network in the energy efficiency sector. Of course, to deliver energy savings, which helps make Alberta businesses more competitive and lowers their costs. And finally, of course, the backbone of why we do this in Alberta is ultimately to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and really help try to address Alberta's long-term sustainability goals. So having worked on efficiency for quite a few years now in the past, most interesting parts of ESB, and I think the subject of today's webinar, is really that we designed this for a unique purpose during a pretty extraordinary time. Early on, we definitely recognized that COVID-19 brought some unique challenges to program delivery and to the businesses that would be participating across the industry sector. So we knew right out of the gate that we had to do some things different. So today what we're going to talk about is these 5 program pandemic principles. I couldn't help but get the alliteration in there. I'm all about the cheap laughs. So anyway, these 5 principles that we thought would help really enable the success of the program. So we'll talk a bit more of these, but the first one was really getting the program set up for success from the start. Keeping contractors at the center of the program was another one. From there, really trying to drive a diversity of project types and contractors to reach across the economy was critical. Keeping this program that's supposed to achieve all these things, complex, keeping that as simple as possible was another one of our principles. And finally, staying on our toes to respond to the market as the program progresses. So we're about halfway in now, and it has for sure been a challenging experience, but also a rewarding experience. And I think it's fair to say COVID-19 and its implications progressed quite a bit more persistently than anyone would have guessed 2 years ago. So with that, I think we're also expecting these unprecedented challenges to persist going forward for some time, likely a couple of years at least. And the challenge is that we're also in a really critical time for climate change action across our province and our country. As we approach 2050, things like energy efficiency programming is going to be more important than ever. So with this presentation, we really wanted to create a space where we can talk about these 5 things we tried, how they're working and what we've learned so far, in hopes that others running programs or participating in programs elsewhere can benefit from it as much as possible. So with that, I'll hand it over to Allison.
Okay. So in line with our first principle, we wanted to share a quick timeline with some of the most important dates in the program that superimpose parallel to the pandemic. That graph might be familiar to everybody by now. So the first wave in May is really what solidified the need for the program. This is when cases were still relatively low, and we were hopeful that controlling the virus would allow a return to work and to normal. The government was looking for ways to actively stimulate economic recovery. ESB has been in planning and design since about October of 2020, which probably feels like a lifetime ago to everybody. We knew things would continue to be unpredictable, so program flexibility was imperative at this point. The program was announced at just about the height of the second wave, with most of the design and measures list complete at that point. So at this time, the effect on the economy of both the pandemic and oil prices were having a major impact, and it was becoming clear that this was not a short-term issue. In this period, we focused on procurement of an implementation partner to help us run the program, and we also focused on finalizing program design. We were really excited to work with Enerva Energy Solutions for their extensive technical expertise, experience running efficiency programs, their custom-built technology solution, and most importantly, their ability and willingness to adapt to the changing situation. This was deliberate, knowing we would need to be responsive to unknown challenges as the program progressed, and they have delivered ever since. We waited until February to launch, when numbers were down again, and when we had confidence this is what the market wanted, and that it was ready for the program. We ensured we had significant contractor feedback, that operations had adapted to ensure safety was the #1 priority, and that contractors were ready to go. So normally when we design a program, and normally when everyone designs a program, we would make sure the program is 100% complete before launching. In these unique circumstances, we made the decision to go ahead in phases so we could get people back to work as quickly as possible. We used a rolling launch approach where design was complete and suites of measures were released as they were ready. We added 3 more batches of measures after the initial launch, including HVAC, building envelope measures, agricultural lighting, food service measures, and higher incentives for smaller combined heat and power. So as mentioned, we started designing this between the first and second wave, which made our first principle, getting set up for success at the start, that much more important. The time between the announcement and launch was also deliberate. We wanted to give people time to prepare for the program before it officially launched, and we wanted to take that time to have robust conversations in the market. So reaching out to design a program is always part of the process, but this time, because of COVID, it was even more critical. To get set up for success, we relied heavily on input from contractors. As a short-term stimulus program, we wanted to make sure that contractors were ready for this program and were actually able to get on site safely. We also wanted to make sure that we understood the current market state for each of the measure categories we have, and that we were offering enticing incentives. We knew a lot of businesses were short on operating capital for infrastructure projects. After our initial discussions with contractors and participants from previous programs, we sent out a poll to ensure that the conversations we'd already had was actually representative of the broader market. 100% of the contractors polled told us that now was the time and that we shouldn't delay launching the program. And they told us that safety protocols had been adapted to account for COVID, and that there was still demand for efficiency measures and global logistics still enabled this program to go forward. This was a really important go, no-go milestone for us. If the results of this poll had been different, if they had told us that now was not the time, we would have delayed launching the program. So based on our initial conversations and previous guidance from other programs, we developed our marketing materials based on measure types instead of by industry or facility, which is what we had done previously in other programs. So contractors told us that materials by measure or measure category help them sell projects because they could offer all those technologies or services on that specific material that we were providing. This approach is much more contractor centric and takes the onus off participants to define their own project. And to get us set up from the start, we also started with a strong team. The team responsible for the program at Emissions Reduction Alberta, like Marc was saying, all came from Energy Efficiency Alberta, where we ran dozens of programs, both residential, commercial, and industrial. So this is important because it made sure that we could get the program launched fast and hit the ground running. And I will also say that an adaptive mindset and knowing how to use data, which is also something that Emissions Reduction Alberta encompasses, was really important to the launch of this program as well. Our second principle, contractors at the center, has always been critical to the success of programs. Anyone who's run a program knows this. This time it was a little bit more imperative because we wanted to get these people back to work as quickly as possible. With COVID, it was challenging to know which industries and participants were actually in a position to act. We knew contractors would know best where their clients were at. And so our outreach was initially focused pretty much solely on this group. We also made sure, as mentioned on the past slide, that we gave them the tools to succeed in the program and just let them do what they do best. We wanted to have a lot of momentum before we launched the program, and we wanted everyone who had previously participated in efficiency programs on board when we launched. Because of this approach, we hosted the largest webinar ERA has held to date, with over 100 people registered, 1,000 people registered. Big difference. We also had 500 contractors sign up before we had even launched, and it's now up to about 1,000 contractors across all measure types. We made sure that signing up as a contractor was the most streamlined it's ever been. If it took longer than 5 minutes, it was too long. At our launch and continuing afterwards, training sessions and materials were built with contractors as the main audience and with their continuing feedback. We ensured our training sessions had two-way communication and that we had ongoing, easily accessible resources available to answer questions of all technical levels. And this was mainly done through our dedicated contact center. Responsiveness was important to us. Delivering what contractors needed to be able to submit applications and get incentives as quickly as possible was critical. So a good example of feedback driving change is our application checklist. Contractors told us that they wanted a quick and easy cheat sheet for each application type. So in response, we delivered that so that people would know ahead of time what they needed to actually submit an application. We also have refined the measures list based on feedback, adding measures such as agricultural lighting, solar heating, waste heat recovery. These are things that we hadn't considered at the beginning, and because of contractors, we added them. We've built a super streamlined tool that makes applying for the program as easy as possible. We're really proud of this tool. This is based on the complexity of large multi-measure applications, which can be a bit hard to submit. And with our application assist function, we basically walk contractors through their application step by step, making it really easy for them to get in and get out. So other ways that we basically internalized contractor feedback was through our sell sheets. Contractors told us that they wanted to have something to give to their clients to explain technologies and incentives. And we've also enabled QR codes on a lot of those. So if we ever get to go to an event again, which is looking seemingly less possible in the days in Alberta, but if we ever get to, we'll have QR codes available so they can have access to digital materials on hand. And we've also done a social media kit. Contractors told us that they were having no issues getting on site, but they were having a hard time getting in front of their clients. So we knew that social media was going to be that much more critical. So we have a social media kit with instructions and some digital resources. So you'll see at the bottom of this slide, there's a bit of an approved contractor for energy savings for business icons that's meant to be on emails, and that's an example of what's in our social media kit.
Perfect. So our third principle was something that we really tried to embed in the actual program design, and that was reaching across the economy. And so by this, what I mean is that as an economic stimulus recovery program, we really wanted to make sure that we were helping support and create jobs across the entire energy efficiency economy. So we wanted to help boost everybody and create a healthy ecosystem where we're getting jobs across all of the different sectors instead of just, for example, chasing a lighting program or having an HVAC program where we're helping but only in a limited area. So that was something we had in mind as we were building this program. The other aspect too was that specifically in Alberta as well, it wasn't just COVID-19, but we were actually having pretty unprecedented economic challenges. But because of that, we knew uptake would be low. So we knew, especially coming out of the first wave and going into the second, a lot of organizations were either closed or very limited in capacity. Focusing on just paying salaries or just paying rent was a huge priority. And as much as it's close to our heart, we knew coming and doing a capital investment in energy efficiency would probably be a lower priority for some. So knowing that, we knew we had to reach a lot more people than normal to get the same level of participation that we would have expected in previous years. So what this meant for us was that we really had to build a program that was as broad and as accessible as possible to really try to get as many different participants and contractors able to come in. So casting a wide net, hopefully we can at least get a normal level of uptake. And achieving this really meant that we had to stretch the limits of what one program could do. We tried to add a huge range of technologies so that we could reach those different contractors, but also have a whole bunch of different options for participants. We had over 14 measure categories with 60 unique technologies. And when you see the list, like this is something that, you know, in previous programs, we might have tried to deliver in 6 or 7 programs. So we had basically like a traditional lighting HVAC prescriptive program. We added compressed airs. We had a solar PV, which was a program on its own in the past. We had CHP and geothermal, things that are usually under a custom program. We had industrial process heating, and then a whole suite of really industry specific things too, like restaurant measures and hospitality, all tied in. The other thing we were trying to do as well was support a wide range of business sizes. Really trying to enable those small businesses across the province to come in with really little projects. So as small as $1,000 project might be able to come into our program, but also trying to drive some really big projects to get some larger action. So supporting projects in the millions. Again, trying to reach businesses from like a small coffee shop to a large multinational corporation with multiple facilities. But we had to be careful, obviously, to put controls in place to make sure if we're allowing these really big projects to come in, that they don't just swoop up all the funds and take it away from the small ones. So it was definitely challenging trying to dial the knobs properly there. Our other goal, of course, was to really drive participation across the whole province. And this is actually something, has been fairly successful in Alberta. But again, making sure that we really carefully track the uptake across small towns, rural areas, as well as the big cities, and then adjusting our marketing and advertising campaign as necessary, to switch from like mass marketing to get the big cities, and really working with local groups like chambers of commerce to get to small towns. So that was kind of one strategy. The next strategy was trying to keep this super broad program simple. So I think in every one of our webinars, when I was introducing ESB or talking about it, I always said time is money. And I know it's super cliched, but for us, we really took that to heart. On our side of things, reducing the administrative complexity as much as possible means lower administrative costs, which ultimately means more money for the participants and more money for incentives. So that was a huge priority for us. Second is that keeping the program easy for participants and contractors means they can spend less time applying, which means more projects and hopefully more time and energy focused on the projects themselves instead of effort applying to the program. So with those two goals, we knew streamlining a complicated program was going to be an essential part of the design. And to be fair, I think streamlining programs isn't a unique concept. It's probably something that everybody does and something we always would try to do. I think what made it challenging really in this case was trying to streamline something that was this broad. So we really tried to deploy 3 strategies, I guess, within that. So the first one was that we chose to do this as part of one single program. I think in our previous experience at Energy Efficiency Alberta, we might have done this over 4 or 5 different programs so that each one could be adjusted to really cater to the needs of the measures. But in this case, grouping them together, it was hard up front, but what it resulted in was it made a much easier experience for the participants and contractors. By doing everything together, we only had one set of rules, one registration process, and once you're in, you could access all the different measures and only have to follow one process. So while it was challenging, that was definitely a priority to glue it all together. What that meant though, was we had chosen to do a prescriptive approach. There's a lot of benefits with that approach compared to a full custom program, let's say. We chose that in this case. The main reasons were being that it's really easy to understand the incentives. You know what you're going to get based on what you do right up front, and you can start right away. I think there's a huge value to custom programs, but given our desire to get out there quickly and make projects go forward right away, the prescriptive approach was important. But once we started adding all these measures, some of those were pretty challenging. I'm sure it's been done a couple times. We did try to look around, but there's not too many places offering CHP, ground source heat pumps, things like waste heat recovery to electricity production, all through a prescriptive inspired program. And so for us, what that meant was really working close with the contractors and the product providers to make sure we understood how these technologies are deployed, really trying to streamline what information we need to collect to make sure that the projects are effective according to our program, but while asking as little as possible to keep it streamlined and fast for participants. And then last but not least, we designed everything with the mind of keeping everything digital as much as possible, which I suspect is probably where a lot of programs are going to be going in the future anyway. But for us, it was fairly new to have digital payment, digital site visits, and particularly the outreach and training early on is something we normally would really like to do in person to get that connection. But for circumstances, we had to do it online. But the other advantages we found is that, especially as folks were working really strange hours with COVID, people were trying to make family and jobs all line up. By doing everything online, we actually opened it up to be a lot more flexible, that contractors or participants could pop in when they wanted to access all the materials and don't have to feel like they're missing out. So those were kind of some of the core strategies we delivered. And we're now about halfway in. So we've been taking a lot of time to look back and see if they're working. One of the biggest goals we were trying to achieve was strong uptake right out of the launch. And as Allison said, especially on our contractor recruitment, this was hugely successful. We had 500 contractors before we even launched the program. And as she said, we got up to 1,000 within a couple of months. That's the sort of thing that in our past programs might have taken over a year to achieve. So that was fantastic. And obviously our solar participation has been tremendous since the beginning. We actually reached 30% of our budget uptake on solar, which was our maximum for an individual measure, within 3 months of having launched. So definitely fantastic to see. We opened it up and just saw a huge amount of applications. Diversity, as I've mentioned quite a few times, was another huge key aspect we were aiming for. And as this map shows, we've had a lot of success getting projects from all across the province. We've got urban participation, rural participation, and we're seeing uptake in the major cities, but also in some of the smaller cities and towns across the province. We're also seeing large and small small and large projects. Granted, 50% of our projects are actually coming from smaller businesses and smaller companies. So we have quite a few under the $10,000 incentive level, but we are still seeing a big chunk in the middle range and even 10% in the projects over $50,000 incentives. So it's pretty exciting. We put a wide range out there and we're seeing them come in accordingly. As our little pie chart shows, we're getting pretty good uptake across all of the measures. Right now, it's obviously pretty heavily weighted by solar, the big orange blob. That's because of that large early uptake. But the other pieces of the pie are actually growing quite steadily. Lighting, of course, being a huge component, but what's really fascinating is the non-lighting, non-solar. In our previous programs, this would be less than 10% of the program. But this time around, we're actually seeing really good participation, on motors and VFDs. We're getting HVAC upgrades. We're even seeing some envelope, which is usually pretty rare. And they're not on here yet because they take a bit longer to get through the approval process, but we have quite a few geothermal ground source heat pump projects working their way through the queue as well. And we're really seeing more come in over time. So it's pretty exciting to see a really good measure mix come in. And similarly, the graph below that, we're seeing pretty good participation breakdown as well. So companies from all different sectors of the economy and all kinds of different building types, which is obviously very fantastic. The other result, I don't have anything on the slide, but our greenhouse gas emissions reductions per dollar are also coming in much better than we expected, which is fantastic. So that being obviously the core of the program's purpose, it's always good. Now, overall, we had planned extremely ambitious timelines. So we were hoping we would fill up within 6 to 12 months, really trying to get that economic driver. We're about halfway in now, and it's definitely leaning towards the longer side of that range. We're kind of just under halfway subscribed at the halfway point. So it's not bad, but it's a bit slower than it could have been. And I think, as we look back, probably the single biggest reason is we really had a lot more COVID implications than anyone expected when we chose that timeline. We've had 3 extra waves where there's been various, closures or limitations, and we're seeing some delays with manufacturing that didn't come up. But I think at this point, overall, we're really pleased with the program. We think it's been a huge success. We're checking off all those metrics that we looked for. And while the uptake is a bit lower than expected, it's steady and it's actually seems to be growing. And I think we expect really this fall to be a good point where it's probably going to ramp up. So stay tuned, and hopefully one day we'll be talking about the second half of the program and how it went.
So I saw Natalie's camera come on. That's
yeah.
our indication to get dragged off the stage. We're getting we're getting orchestrated out. This is our last slide, so I'll be super quick on this one. We just wanted to talk about adaptive management. So this is our final principle and probably the most important one that we've used throughout the program. So with this approach, we knew that we needed to treat some of the rules as guidelines. We try to be really flexible when it comes to completion deadlines, knowing that there are going to be challenges getting on site, getting approvals. So we are pretty flexible with deadlines. If people need a couple weeks to get their completion documents in, we're open to that. An adaptive management test means we're not afraid to make course corrections as the program progresses. This is not typical of most programs. Most typical programs start with a design set at the beginning of a 3-year cycle and are just left to run and market. We also keep a really close eye on the market, probably to the point of over monitoring it. We feel like this is necessary right now just because of the changing circumstances. And I've got a lot of examples of adaptive management, but I'll just try to share a couple here. So originally, we saw a lot of smaller applications that didn't quite meet our minimum threshold for incentives of about $1,000. So we changed it. We made it lower. We made it $500, and we made it more inclusive to ensure all business sizes could participate. And then we did do some changes to technical requirements, and we keep changing the measures list just to ensure that it's reflecting the latest industry standards, like, including larger boilers and higher incentives on the CHP, like I mentioned. So this is a short-term stimulus program. It is only meant to be in market and was only ever meant to be in market for a little bit more than a year. We have half of our funding left. We have about 46%. And we do encourage you to share this with anyone you know who is interested or could be eligible. And the thing, I guess the last thought we wanted to share is the one thing we know for sure is that we don't know what's coming, especially with COVID. So looking back on the last 6 months and how much of it was unexpected, we really, we had no idea what to expect, and we still don't know what to expect with COVID. So continuing to adapt is probably one of the biggest tools in our toolbox going forward. So thank you very much for having us today. Our contact information is on this slide, and we would love to encourage you to turn on your cameras. We'd love to see some faces, and to, if you saw anything on here that you wanted to ask us a question about, or if you have anything that we didn't share, we would love to hear that from you as well. So with that, I'll hand it back to Natalie. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Allison, and thanks, Marc. And I know there are already a number of questions here, so that's why I came on, because I know a number of people want to ask some questions. So that was warm, like exciting to see that you have such success over COVID, and some lessons learned as well, which is always great. And I know I have a few questions of my own too. But before we open the floor, I just a quick reminder, everyone, that we do have one rule, which is the same rule as we have for our presenters, and that's no sales pitches. So that includes statements disguised as questions. So please stick to questions at this time. And there are 2 ways to ask. One, again, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you, or 2, you can type it in the question box and I will narrate it on your behalf. So the first one we have here, because there's quite a few, is from Zaina, is: are energy advisors included in the process and deciding of where best energy savings can be achieved? So for residential.
Yeah, so maybe I can just answer that quick. Obviously, it's not a residential program. That being said, energy advisors do play a role in the commercial sector as well. But as a prescriptive program, it's not a required or really built-in part of the program. We really are just specifying technologies, and the participants can get to their project in whatever path they want. But we did make eligible expenses include energy audits or energy advisory work if it's related to the project. That doesn't necessarily affect the incentive, but with our structure, it can help. So I guess indirectly, yes, but directly, no, it wasn't part of the program. But it's definitely an option. And when folks don't know what to do, that would be something we would encourage them to pursue.
I have to hit my unmute button there. So thanks for that. Good to know. A question here is: you mentioned virtual site visits during the presentation. Could you share some lessons learned or main challenges encountered with virtual site visits? And if possible, could you share the software, tools, or apps that you use to conduct the virtual site visits?
Yeah, I saw that question come up. It's a great one. I'd love to share what we've learned. Truth being told, we've only done a few so far because we're still pretty early. So projects are just coming in finished now. And the projects that we've had finished so far have all been lighting or solar PV, which in a prescriptive program, it was quite straightforward. So they've all gone very well and been quite simple, I guess, in that sense. So we haven't got any major lessons learned yet because they were pretty easy. I suspect that once we get into some of the more complex projects, that's where we'll see some of the challenges. The kind of first thing that comes to mind was making sure that folks had good bandwidth, and especially as they're walking around. So our team was pretty careful to really share the requirements before, to say, like, make sure you have working cell phones, good connection. If you're using Wi-Fi, is it in every room you need to go in, stuff like that. So that's helped. But yeah, no challenges yet, but I'd say we haven't really been tested on something super hard yet. And unfortunately, I don't know the name of the software, but basically it's like screen sharing with a camera live. There's probably a number of different tools. We looked at quite a few, but yeah, unfortunately, I don't know the one we're using.
No problem. I also will say that before the break, we had Efficiency Nova Scotia or Efficiency One come on, and they did quite a bit of virtual auditing. And so there was a discovery presentation that was recorded that you can find on our website. So if you just go and look at that one, I can't remember the exact date, but you can find it there. So they did a whole presentation on the challenges and success that they've seen. And there are a number of companies as well that do virtual audits that have come on and given presentations. So you can find those as well on our website as well. And I don't want to mention names because I'll forget somebody, I'm sure. So let's see here. Another question is from Judith. So what are your strategies for getting strong engagement from contractors in the planning phase? And how do you cast a wide net to reach such a large group of contractors? You mentioned you reached 1,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can start with that one. And Marc, if you want to jump in, please do. So I think we're lucky because we did come from an organization that had a really good list of people. And I won't lie, that was a huge part of our success in the beginning. We were a new organization, so we did move over to Emissions Reduction Alberta. And so that was a big change for people. And we kind of needed to establish ourselves because I think Efficiency Alberta was established pretty well in Alberta. And I'll give a lot of props to our previous colleagues over there because they did an incredible job building an industry and making it feel inclusive and like a network. And so I think, some of the other ways that we tried to cast that net was a big part of it was advertising. We were very, very specific about where we advertised, who we advertised to. We tried to be as inclusive as possible, knowing we had such a huge list of measures. And associations are always huge. We did extensive background research, probably even more so than we did at Energy Efficiency Alberta, into major associations, but also some of the minor ones that we hadn't heard of because some of these measures were new to us, like geothermal. So establishing new relationships with associations that we had not established relationships with before was really big. And then again, just consistent communication. Consistent communication was a big part through our newsletter and through our website updates. We tried to just keep, what was going on in the program, any changes that we were making, any new environmental challenges that we were facing. We tried to make those really open and upfront, especially with our contractors. Marc, did you want to add anything to that?
I thought that was great. The only thing I'll add too was that we did announce it before, giving a couple months for folks to register.
Yeah.
And if you'd asked me before this program, I'd say that you should probably never do that. It's a very risky practice of coming out and creating some expectations and you don't have all the details. But in this case, it was really necessary to get that early start, allowing folks to have a hint of what was coming, think about it, learn about it, spread some of that momentum and get people registered. And so that's the other reason why we could start on day one we actually started a couple of days early to let contractors start registering. So that by the time we actually opened the door, there was a lot of folks ready to go. So it worked out this time really well.
That's awesome. I would say that people are more willing these days just to say, work with flexibility and say it's like, if you don't know or it's not on a set date, they're like, that's okay, which is nice to see as well. And you mentioned your previous colleague. So actually, your previous colleague who started the Trade Ally program there actually has a question. So I'm going to ask her a question next. She jumped to the top. So yeah. So regarding the completion extension for larger projects like CHP, is there a deadline on October 1st of this year to apply, or could we still apply November or December and still have until October 1st, 2022 to complete it?
Hi, Kelsey. Thanks for joining. Yeah, it's a great question. So the maximum we can give projects is 12 months. So most get 6, and then complex projects can apply to get up to 12 months to complete. So it's not that there's a deadline to apply by October 1st. It's just that after that date, we can only offer fewer months. So a November project would only get 11, a December project would only get 10, and so forth. So yeah, absolutely. If you have a project and you can still make the end completion timeline, we'll definitely continue to accept you as a new application past October 1st this year.
That's a good, that's nice to hear. I'm sure she'll like that answer. So thanks, Marc. Another question, actually, you mentioned being flexible with your program and flexible timelines. Do you think that that's here to stay with programs in general, or do you think that's just happened to the pandemic, where you're going to go back to like quote unquote normal after this?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I would say Alberta hasn't had a normal for program delivery yet. We've had off and on programs, and most jurisdictions would run a program like this over a few years, where there is quite a bit more opportunity for flexibility. So I think the hard part was, we were being flexible within the fact that we were having a really short one-time program. I'd say based on our experience here, it's a necessity. So it's going to have to be a part of, part of programs, at least for the foreseeable future. I think probably the next 5 years, the budget, the economy, the supply chain, everything's going to be a little bit unpredictable. So yeah, I would say it's going to have to become a big part, if it isn't already, for most programs.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Allison.
I was just going to say, I'm seeing a lot of comments about different, speaking about flexibility, different technology types and measure types in the comments and in the questions list. So, I to get to everyone would take much more time than we have, and I know we're close to the end. So I would just say, if you do have a technology that is, pretty cost effective, and you're interested in potentially participating in the program, get a hold of us. That's how a lot of contractors, how we talk to a lot of contractors about their technologies and technologies they'd like to see added. So just get a hold of us. Natalie will have our contact information, or it will be on the recording in that slide that I put up. So we're happy to hear about technologies that you have.
Awesome, thanks for that. That was my last question. So you looked into the crystal ball to figure that one out. So there you go. So thank you again, Marc, and thank you, Allison, for the insightful presentation, and the it's exciting to see the progress that you've made and the success that you guys have had, that COVID didn't hold things back for you. And in fact, I would say that it's actually the opposite, which is nice to see. So thank you again for joining us, and the great conversations and great questions from everyone here today. Next week, we're going to be joined by Fortis BC, who is going to share their plans and how they're working towards delivering on the promise of Clean BC's ambitious vision for decarbonizing by 2050. So they also have an interim target to reduce their customer emissions by 30% by 2030, which is actually one of North America's most ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals for natural gas utility. So this is definitely going to be an insightful one, and hopefully an inspiring one for other natural gas folks out there. So I hope you can join me. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone. Thanks again to Marc and Allison for joining us, and take care. Bye-bye.